Who else is also going to flip from any type of exports into 100% imports? USDA was talking about how tight the amount of wheat is globally at the moment. I think of the total amount of supply. Let's say there's 100% of supply. There's 700 million tons out there. Let's say that's the total amount, 700 million tons. Only 25% of that's actually going to be for export anywhere on the planet. The other 75% is going to be not for export, locked in the countries that are producing. Now, generally, that's 50% or above. Generally, more than half's out there for sale, exports flowing around the planet at any one time. But if you're looking at that, it's below 25 or 25%. It was 27% a couple of weeks ago. Now it's 25%. And these new headlines coming out where now Asian buyers are looking over to South America for help to get their supplies. Now, what if they can't get the wheat? What are they going to switch to? See, that's the thing. There's an enormous amount of soybeans and corn this year because, the conditions for growing between this wheat and oats wipeout have been a bumper for the soybean and the corn. So if they can't get the wheat, will they buy corn? Will their customers accept corn instead of wheat products? Will they accept cornbread instead of wheat bread?
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the Grand Solar Minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David DuByne.
But Asians like to, experiment with new cuisines and tastes from different parts of the world. This is, again, everywhere you look, and it's Australia gripped by big freeze, record temperatures tumble, fierce frost shatter harvest hopes. Now, when you got a full-on corporate media-controlled newspaper in Australia using fierce frost shatter harvest hopes as a news headline, you would generally get that on some sort of, alternative, uncontrolled news that feeds their own, and they have no corporate control over them, so they can say what they want and they can tell the news exactly how it is. But for a major corporate controlled newspaper to come out and say fierce frost shatter harvest hopes, record temperatures tumble, that's a big headline for now on to Canada. Don't know if you've seen this over Edmonton. Heavy snow brings harvests to standstill. Now they're still counting the damage. They still haven't gotten a full assessment, the crop tours, but they were looking at 3 million acres of lost crops. Farmers are calling it exceptional. They were not expecting it, although those people following the Grand Solar Minimum intensification were expecting it because that's what's expected. Also going along with that, the IPCC, our favorite bunch of persons with wrong models, they're switching this new year's report that's coming out. They're actually mentioning cooling in the report. Now, they're talking about cooling, but they're saying that the cooling is because of warming, which makes no sense. If it's cooling, it's cooling.
And if you're interested in advertising on Mini Ice Age Conversations podcast, which I also post on YouTube, I include a 30-second intro, 3-minute mid-roll, and a 10-second outro. If your product or service fits my audience, you can contact me through the email address podcast@oilseedcrops.org. That's podcast@oilseedcrops.org.
But the IPCC report mentions cooling, which is a gigantic step forward anyway for them to admit and even use that lexicon of cooling. Great. But the way they explain it is the heating is causing the cooling. So again, they won't ever come off the CO2 narrative. They're going to keep pushing that thing again and again and again. Now, as I was mentioning before, the Asian buyers, the Asian food prices, Philippines, etc., Myanmar. Now we have China's inflation, 6-month high, driven by a surge in food prices due to extreme weather. 9% rise in vegetable prices, 13% rise in meat. Okay, the list can go on there. What are the citizens in that country going to stop spending on first as they divert that money into the food sector? So we're starting to see it country by country, and now it's not just little tiny economies, Fiji. Now we're over into China, second largest economy on the planet, getting driven, slammed by food inflation, and it's not going to stop. They're just still taking into consideration the hundreds of millions of chickens they just had to slaughter due to the flu. The bird flu is back, and as I forget, even it's like H7N9, or have to dig into the newspaper to see which exact strain it is, because they're changing and flipping so quickly with these bird flu strains over there. It's hard to keep up anymore. That would include geese, not just chickens, but geese, quail, fowl, ducks, anything like this, the birds. So you could expect the meat prices in birds, that sort of poultry, to fish, meat, poultry, it's all going up. Even the fish food, now they're telling people, because of the shortages in the millers, if you will, and the soya bean processors that do the fish meal, the largest soya bean processor in China went out of business. They went bankrupt. China government bailed them out, though. But during that interim of being sort of out of business and not being able to function, the creditors were there, and people wanted to confiscate machinery, et cetera, inside the factories and processing facilities. They supply a lot of food and fish pellets, fish feed manufacturers. They're kind of all in the same ballpark there, if you will. So what they had told the citizens, well, since the soybean manufacturers and the soybean processors are not able to do this, and the food manufacturers can't give you the fish feed, and it was all an excuse as to why the price of fish was rising now. Understanding having to kill 100 million birds, fine. Understandable, my chicken price is going to go up, my egg price is going to go up. Understood. Pig prices are going up because the soybean millers can't get the soybean in there because of the trade war with the United States. Okay, that's understandable. Good excuse. I'll buy it. It's like an 8 out of a 10 of an excuse. But then the fish prices were rising. So see, this is the thing where something so obscure that they had to now make an excuse why fish prices are rising across China. And it had to be with the bankrupt soya producer. Have you taken a look at your own prices in the United States? Which brings us clear back to the first square there with this Hurricane Florence and all these chickens and pigs that have been drowned or need to be killed due to disease across the East Coast. North Carolina is a large chicken producer, especially Georgia too, but it wasn't too affected by the hurricane. But if you come down in the southeast U.S., a lot of chicken farms. But see, it's so explainable away. You can explain it away, and it seems semi-legitimate as well, all these excuses for all the food price rises. Now, what if it's really something else going on? Now, you cannot tell me that this many countries across the planet are experiencing crop losses, food price inflation, all at the same time due to random circumstances. This random thing is happening over there, and this random thing's happening, and this random thing here, and there, yeah, right. I just don't buy it. And speaking of the China soybeans, if any of you are out there following on the futures market, this is September 10th. This is about 10, 12 days ago. China soybean futures had set the biggest daily gain on record after more cold descended out of Siberia. So they're still trying to get the crop losses here in China due to the extreme cold that was way out of season, way early. In addition to everything else I'm talking about that's going on across the planet, now they're getting crushed with the extreme cold coming from Siberia early. Now, how do you think they're going to explain that to the citizens? Okay, soybeans just jumped the biggest daily gain on record. Cold weather. You got this soybean spat with America. So which is it really? Is it they knew the cold weather was coming, so they were explaining the soybean tariff war to explain it away as normal? Which one's more frightening for a populace? Cold is destroying our crops and we have no control over it, and next winter's going to be colder, and next autumn's going to be cooler, and next spring. And from this point forward, year after year, all these crops are going to be lost more and more, larger and larger amounts. The food prices are going to keep rising indefinitely, and this year is just like a drop in the bucket for 10% inflation. When you're talking literally about doubling and tripling of food prices by 2021, 2022? Or is it easier just to say that there's a trade war with America and the reason your soybeans are costing more money is because there's a trade war, those bad Americans? You could stir up national sovereignty as well, couldn't you? So which one? It'd be much more beneficial for a government just to stir it up and say, hey, the Americans are causing your food prices to rise with all their bad tariffs. Couple billion on from nature, suddenly there's an enemy at the gates, if you will, somewhere to throw that anger at. Certainly they don't want that anger thrown at them for not preparing and not telling the citizens that to get ready for this Grand Solar Minimum event. Of course not. That would never happen, would it? They're going to have to start to control the narrative in the media here shortly, and we can already see this beginning to happen here. And I'm going to keep reading you down the list until the break. Central America, 2 million, risk of starvation after climate shift. Now this goes in with the shifting rainfall patterns. We're seeing this globally. This is happening. Everywhere you look, it's a once in a 200-year flood. This is easily explainable. Easily explainable. It is a shift in the intertropical convergence zone. This happens every Grand Solar Minimum. Magnetosphere weakens and our jet streams move into different flows. So does our moisture. And since they're going and being pushed and shoved into new places that haven't really adjusted yet with the cloud patterns and the cloud cells globally, you're going to get some crash ups like a traffic jam. You're going to get those bunching up of the clouds until things start to, it'll take a few years. It'll start to smooth out eventually. But the shifting rainfall patterns creating drought in some areas and massive floods in others. Once in a 200-year storm, that's a normal thing now. Once in a century storm, that's like weekly, minutely, daily. That's the new norm. If you know what's happening, awesome. You can start to prepare for it. You can see the opportunity inside there. But let's add another to the list. Another region bites the dust, literally. And I hate to say that, but it's because of drought. Climate shift. Central America going into a drought. Well, this is what drove the Mayans to collapse circa 800 AD. This is what drove the Tang Dynasty to collapse circa 800 AD. Now, what do you see that's matching here? The drought in these same two locations that are marked in history by collapses of dynasties and kingdoms. In the same exact patterns, in the same exact places, and we're supposed to think that this is just random happenstance. I personally don't think so. It's my own opinion, though. I think that at the very minimum, we're repeating something in the 1,200-year cycle. It's a heavy, more powerful cycle than the 400-year Grand Solar Minimum. It would be a set of three, would it not? It would be a cycle of three within three. And three is you start to see threes, sixes, and nines wherever you go across the planet, and I don't care which culture, which religion, you see it again and again and again. Maybe they marked these out. Maybe that's what the three was all about. And maybe three of these 1,200-year cycles is 3,600 years. And then we start to get the 3 plus the 6 is 9. And we start to see this everywhere. Canadian cabbage prices set to soar. European leaks, cauliflower, broccoli shortages. In recent years, the weather has become more erratic. Yeah, good explanation. Thanks for that in-depth article. The weather has become more erratic. See, they'll say that. They'll put it in the news media, corporate media, they'll put it in there. Weather is erratic, but they'll never really come down to it except they'll keep blaming it on CO2, which it's not. It's the sun. So that's your greatest strength, is knowing where these changes are coming from. So if you're living in Canada, your cabbage prices are going to soar. Now, again, how many people are eating cabbage and how many people will shift and buy something cheaper in the cabbage industry maybe could find some balance. Restaurants, are they going to continue to serve coleslaw? Will they switch? Will they not have it? Who knows? It's an interesting mind experiment and interesting to see how the economy is going to shift on a single thing like cabbage. You could probably do a whole thesis on cabbage usage and utilization and consumer spending habits as it reaches a certain price point, and then people no longer want it. It'll be priced out of the market. Same with the European leeks. I mean, how many people eat leeks or need leeks for cooking? You know, for some, it's an integral part of the taste of the dish. Cauliflower and broccoli, shortages of those. Historically low European potato harvest, and they blame it on shifting jet streams. Okay, awesome. Thank you. Due to, get this one, reduced low solar activity. But they don't. So here we are, lowest European potato harvest on record. But again, how far back are they going in the records? They just put the record on record, but they don't tell you exactly when the record began. And again, that's one of my qualms with corporate media is they'll say on record, but they don't tell you how far back that goes. If it goes back to like 1967, that's not really a record because you need to go back to maybe the potato famine in the 1800s, and we'll start to see, is it truly the lowest on record? And I can just keep going here. Here's another one. UK extremes, 2018 to send food prices skyrocketing. UK wheat wheat yields plummeted 25%. So now if you've been following it with a map and you've put a pin in each of these places I'm telling you, you've gone completely around the planet. We have gone from Europe to North America, over to Asia, to South America, to Central America, Australia. And we didn't talk about Africa, though. Well, we could because South Africa is going to go down to 0 in their yield on wheat. It's actually going to go 0 yield on everything because the land confiscation is a political maneuver to mask the climate changing in the Grand Solar Minimum that's going to reduce the yields out of there. So I think it covers pretty much every continent now. Kenyan farmers urged to take up insurance due to adverse climate shocks. Second place, poor harvest, early frost, shift in rainfall patterns to blame in Kenyan corn losses. And again, we have gone completely around the planet, and you see it happening everywhere. Russian wheat supply concerns, USDA not really talking about that too much. They're trying to keep that under wraps. And if you look at the USDA reports, which I highly recommend that you would do, they have the ending stocks, the carryover stocks. So what they did was they started 5 years ago when they'll show you 2012 and 13, then there's 13, 14, 14, 15, 15, 16, 16, 17, 17, 18. So these are the years of that they'll have in the 5 years. They'll have 5 columns. Well, the carryover was 570 million tons. This is just for the global grains. But then that suddenly drops down to 520 million tons this year. So I'm wondering where the 50 million tons has gone to, because this is the carryover. This is what's left at the end of the year after they've sold off and have they balanced with the imports, with the exports. Why is it down 50 million tons? And this is straight from the USDA. I encourage you to go over. You can check out their website.
And if you're an advertiser looking for a venue to talk about and explain your product or service, this segment of the podcast is 3 minutes, where I go into great detail about what you can offer the listeners to many Ice Age conversations. It has to provide value, has to be of value, and increase the overall quality of life of people listening to this podcast. And it's not just about me saying, hey, give me money to come on my podcast as an advertiser. It's more about your company, your products. What's the objective or the goals that you have for your campaign? Do you want to just sell products, or do you want to get people to come to your location, or is it just about awareness of your brand? What kind of branding message do you really want? And this is where it comes into interpersonal communication between myself and yourselves is really what's the objective that you wish to accomplish and that I wish to accomplish, and where we can meet in the center so it's a win-win for everybody, including the listeners as well. Everybody has to find value from this. If you feel your company fits this bill, you can contact me, David DuByne, through the website address podcast@oilseedcrops.org. That's podcast@oilseedcrops.org. Mini Ice Age Conversations is a tri-weekly podcast where I discuss issues linking a 400-year grand solar minimum cycle in our sun to Earth's changing climate and the maximum amount of food that we will be able to grow for everyone in the 2020s. Your crystal ball for the economy, food prices, and society is a history book circa 1640 to 1710. The podcast that I host is a video on the Advantage 2030 channel here on YouTube. 10,000 views on average or greater. Also within Libsyn, every episode at least 1,000 downloads. Send me a message and I'll make sure you get a demographic and rate sheet.
There's so many other resources out here for you to take advantage of as well. I'm not the only person covering these types of changes that are occurring on our planet. I'm just one of many. I encourage you to take a look at Ice Age Farmer. Christian does a great job covering these same types of food crop losses. Diamond over at Oppenheimer Ranch Project is always talking about these same things. Christopher, the climate guy, Ice Age 2050. How about the Suspicious Observers? That crew with Ben Davidson, Trevor, Billy, they're always talking about these same things as well. There's just so many voices out there, and the amount of people talking about the changes is just, it's becoming larger and larger every day. And it's great that more people are talking about it, because I think together as a collective voice of explanation of why it's happening, the censorship in the media that's beginning, I think we could have a good chance of pushing back against this, because as you've seen, I wanted to talk also about Article 11 and Article 13 coming out of the EU. And if you don't know what that is, I wanted to cover it here for you with the new copyright laws. It's also termed the link tax. And it's nothing more than a ploy to control the narrative of the media as we move forward. Nothing more. That is purely what it's about. These new, now first of all, let's even take a step back, and you have to understand that the EU is a body of unelected officials. Unelected. Nobody, they're to the point when they're unappointed themselves. And now they think they're sitting back there in their high thrones and they can pass legislation that will affect the rest of the world, even though they're just in Europe and they're unelected. Well, personally, I don't play that game, and I don't think we should either. The only reason that they're allowed to even consider going with this is because people go along with it. I think once you start to stand up and say, no, we don't even accept this. You're not even from our continent. You're unelected, and we didn't elect you, and our own government officials can tell you to take a hike back, get off the internet, and leave us alone. Once we start to stand up as a collective voice and say this to the unelected EU bureaucrats, the better off we're all going to be. This takes us right back into Article 11. Now, if you haven't heard about this, it is a new way to limit your ability to share any types of information across social media. And when I say that, I really mean they are about to clamp down, or try to clamp down, on the way that you can share anything in the media. So it's as simple as this. If you put a link in Facebook, they're going to demand that Facebook pays a tax and pays, let's say the article came from The Guardian. I've referenced them tonight. If that comes from The Guardian, they're going to have to pay The Guardian a small amount of money for the link that they're posting inside their platform. How long do you think it's going to be if Facebook is responsible for paying for the individual taxes or licensing fees for each link that they post within their platform? Not you. Facebook, Twitter, any of these platforms where they're having other links from other sources that are considered copyrighted sources, they're going to want a internet tax. Also, they're going to require an upload filter. This upload filter is a gray area anyway. So what they're saying is any platform out there is going to have an upload filter that's going to be searching full-time for copyrighted content that's uploaded into their platform. And if they do find it, they're going to have to pay a tax on it, a link tax. Now, first of all, you have to realize that to generate an upload filter that can run through billions and billions and billions of links, posts, images, videos, etc., that requires an AI algorithm. So these smaller platforms are not going to be able to comply with that. So just think about BitChute, for example. Brand new video platform. I encourage you to go there, censorship free. By law, the way the law is coming from the EU, they're going to require BitChute to have an upload filter on there, which is going to cost millions and millions of dollars to put that algo together. And they're going to have to run it 24/7 looking for copyrighted content. And when they find it, they're going to have to pay a tax on it or remove that video off their platform. This is supposedly the new stated law. This is Article 13. Article 11 is straight up internet tax link, or link tax, if you want to call it that. Anything that you share from any source that is not your own will have a tax on it just to share the link. And that tax, the burden will be on the platform, not you. So what do you think everybody's going to do that's out there in the social media space? They're not going to stop sharing links. They're absolutely going to share links. Now, what are the platforms going to do? They're going to rein that in so quickly on how much you're going to be able to share because they don't want to be held financially responsible for the link tax, which means they're absolutely going to stop and completely wall off your ability to communicate between peers. That's what this is all about. They try to phrase it like, oh, we're trying to protect content creators, blah, blah, blah. The last time any European oligarchs cared about content creators was never, ever, never. But they're trying to sell it as that, like, oh, we're trying to protect. Well, maybe they're trying to protect the record and CD companies, perhaps. Maybe they're trying to protect the film industry, perhaps. But even on YouTube, you can't upload a full movie onto YouTube. Are you kidding me? There's already filters inside to prevent a lot of this from happening. So when they come out and they say, oh, internet tax, well, everything needs to be taxed. Why? First, you might want to ask yourself, why? If it's run this smoothly all the way until now, and if I want to, and where do we get into the fair use compared to what is considered copyrighted material that requires a link tax? So, for example, like what I've been talking about tonight on the program, if you were with me for the first hour, I was running out a bunch of news articles from across the web, corporate-controlled media, some of it alternative media, talking about the crop losses globally that are happening across all the continents. I mean, except Antarctica, unless they're doing indoor agriculture and they're affected somehow. Otherwise, every single continent has food losses at the moment that's driving prices. Inflation on food is a global event. Crop losses is a global event at the moment. Now, just by me sharing that and referencing a Guardian article and reading the title to you would suddenly require an internet link tax. So where is it that fair use to report the news comes off and is not a link tax? This is the gray area. And as I've said, and Christian from Ice Age Farmer focuses on this a lot as well, the more the crops are being lost, the higher the food prices get, the more crazy our weather gets, the more they're going to try to control the ability to share this information outside a controlled narrative. A controlled narrative that will be built around CO2, that is going to be built around total control that everything is fine. It's going to be disseminated through the global corporate-controlled media, and what they say is the reasons for the crop losses, the intensity of the crop losses is going to be through their lens only. And this is the reason for the link tax and the upload filter. They are going to try to silence anybody else from spreading this information. And that would include you talking to your friend in Kansas and said, hey, we just lost all our wheat and I can't believe my grandpa's farm has no yield this year. When you're talking to somebody in Florida who said, I can't believe that either. Our grandparents just lost their entire fruit orchard and we don't have any orange juice coming out this year. That type of sharing of peer-to-peer information will be forbidden. And this is where it's going to go. I mean, China is already trialing this. If you haven't seen or heard about the social credit score and the new laws where in China you are forbidden from even reporting on the news if it did not come from state-run media. If you do, you will be arrested. You're causing social chaos, as they call it.
And this is the 10-second outro explaining who was sponsoring the podcast, so people can, for that very last opportunity, jump back in to see what your company has to offer and how everybody can benefit.